Hello everyone and welcome back to ASP.NET Core 1.0. My name is Steve Bishop, and in this video we're going to be talking about using HTML helpers to create a form. Now for this video I'm just going to hop right into it and do a demonstration of how to use an HTML helper to create your form. So I will be working inside of our Index with Form view, where we have our form that the user could input in an ID, a first name, last name, phone number, and submit it, and that would send that submission to our index action here, this one here, and it would bind the data that the user inputted into the form to this contact parameter. And then of course if everything was correct, then it would send it on through to the view, which is just our regular index view, and it would display our first name, last name, the ID, and a made-up customer name. So that is the flow of our application currently. Now with the help of our Razor View engine, we've gone ahead and used the View Start page to define a layout for all of our views. And that layout has an HTML tag, a head tag, some body tags, and of course a title tag. And this means that we only have to focus on the code that's supposed to go between these two divs when we're designing our views. And right now, our view still has the head and body tag as well as the HTML tag. So now that that is actually covered by this layout, we don't need it in our view anymore. So we can go ahead and remove the HTML, the header, and the body tags. So now let's go ahead and focus on our form. So we have this this starting form tag, and this form tag sets the action to /home/index, and it uses the method of post. And again, this could be either a get or a post when you're posting back to your controller. And that method action is very important because we have this HTTP post attribute on this particular index action that is supposed to be model binding that contact information to it. So it's very important that our form holds that we are sending the action to the home index action, and then the method should be a type of post. Let's go ahead and comment out our beginning form tag. I'm just going to comment it out for right now. And I'm going to use the HTML helper to begin to create our form. Now you'll notice that the HTML helper has quite a few different methods in here. Some of them are extension methods and some of them are just regular methods on the HTML helper. So if I go through the list here, towards the top we'll see this begin form method. Now as part of the IntelliSense, you'll see that we have some overloads. We have 12 of them for this begin form. And we can see that the begin form method renders a open form tag, and that's the start tag, to the response. And then the form's action attribute value will match the current request. So if we don't pass any parameters to this begin form method, then it's just going to give us a form tag where the action attribute value will match the current request. And that current request is going to be our index action on our home controller, because notice that in order to get to this index with form view, we're just calling the index action on our home controller. So this is the default action, and the default action on our MVC project goes ahead and calls that index with form page. So what we should get then is, if we just leave it this way with this begin form, we should just get an action like we have up here that points to the home index, or the default for the application. And the method is going to also be the default for the begin form method, which, although it's not stated in here, it is actually a post. A default for a form action is post. So if we leave it like this and go ahead and run our application, we might have expected that this form should look like it did before. But we don't get that. We get this Microsoft.ASP.NET Core MVC rendering MVC Form with the ID. Let's go ahead and take a look at the source of our page right now. And we see down here in the source that form action just points to a /, which means it's going to call the root of our web portal or of our web application. And then the method is, like I said, the default, which is post. Now, this action with a / comes about because, again, the default action of our application is the home index action. And since that's just that's already the call that we have up here when we initially did it, there's our /. It's taking that / and saying, okay, that's the action that you already called, so I'm just going to redo that same action. Remember, it's just basically a post back to the same action. That's what we saw when we took a look at the definition here, or the IntelliSense. We see that it just says the form's action attribute value will match the current request. And the current request is just simply a /. And that's why we have the / there as our form action. But what's all this? What's this Microsoft.ASP.NET Core MVC rendering MVC Form? Well, it turns out that the begin form method is returning an object type of MVC Form. And the MVC Form class implements iDisposable. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the iDisposable interface, the iDisposable interface has a dispose method that will be called on it when you use it appropriately. If you don't use it appropriately, you can get some interesting side effects because the class is expecting you to call that dispose method whenever it's in use. Now, the way that you ensure to call that dispose method when you are done with it is to wrap your class in a using statement. So let's go ahead and use the using statement here. And now we have a proper use of the begin form method, which is going to return that MVC form class. Now, one of the other things that the using statement will do when it calls that dispose method on our MVC form is that the MVC form class will also output a close form tag. So effectively, this will not work because if we were to use it in place like this, it would give us our opening form tag and our closing form tag immediately after. Let's try saving this and running it. Well, we've gotten rid of that extra text because we're using the using statement, but let's check out the source here to just make sure our form is correct. We have a form action method, and we have a new input here. This is interesting, request verification token. But if we scroll all the way to the end, you'll notice that we have a closed form tag here before we actually start to create our labels and our inputs on our page. So we have a closed form tag before we even get any of the controls in our form. And this will make the form inoperable. It just simply won't work. Luckily for us, the solution to this is very, very simple. I'm just going to go ahead and stop our application again. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all of this, all the buttons, labels, and the text boxes, and I'm going to remove it from outside of our begin form and our using statement. And I'm going to post it here inside of these open and closed curly braces. And I'll just kind of make this look a little nicer here by doing some formatting. And now, since I know that there will be a closing form tag at the end of my using statement here, I'm just going to go ahead and delete the one that's already here in my code. And let's go ahead and save that. And now let's try running this again. Okay, so we have the same look to our form, but let's check out the source code again and just make sure that our form is properly formatted. So now we have our opening form tag. We have a label now with our inputs. So we see our labels, our inputs, we have our button. And now at the end, if we scroll past this extra input that was added here, and we'll cover this in just a moment, but if we go all the way to the end of this, we'll see there is our closed form tag. So we have a open form tag, we have all of our controls in our form, and then at the very end, we finally have our closed form tag. So the way that you need to format your forms then in your CSS/HTML whenever you're using the begin form HTML helper method is that you need to input all of your different input types, your text boxes, your buttons, that sort of thing, inside this open and closed curly brace, and that will properly format your form for you. So what about that request verification token? What is this? Well, this is an effort to stop something called cross-site scripting, where a user pretends, or a potential hacker will set up a web page to look and mimic your web page and give the user the impression that they are actually at your site. And then when they go to submit the various input, they will then have all of the information that they need in order to access the page. Now, the way that you prevent that is by having this special token. This is a secret or shared key, if you will, that only this machine that is issuing the request will be able to understand. And this is actually based upon some machine IDs. So it's able to validate this particular key and make sure that it is coming from the same location. It knows that this HTML or this input tag that is a type hidden is coming from the same box that that did the initial issuance of this form. So when the form was generated, it added this key that is specifically designed to this machine, and then when it gets submitted, when the whole form gets submitted, it will also include this request verification token value along with that request, and then it's compared by your code to make sure that the token is correct. And the way that you do that is on the action that's supposed to be accepting the form. You just simply have to allow this, you simply have to add the attribute that accepts the token, or I should say verifies the token. So that's validate anti-forgery token. So anytime that you have an action that is accepting a post or a get and is model binding some sort of data to a parameter, and that comes from a form that you might have here, you want to use this validate anti-forgery token to make sure that that request is coming from the same machine and not coming from some other person's machine, some other, maybe a potential hacker or someone who's mimicking your web page in some way. Now, when we use this begin form method, it automatically adds the anti-forgery token with the view. So that is why when we get the actual generated code, we see that it's automatically included as part of our form. So now let's move on to some of these labels and input text boxes, because aside from just beginning and closing a form, you can actually use the same HTML helper to create these labels and these inputs. Now, to start with, in order to do this, the first thing I want to go ahead and do is assign a model to this view. So I'm going to go ahead and say the model is a type of contact that we had here in our models. So this is what we're going to be setting as the model for our view. So we're going to do model, and we can just do contact. And we can do contact because we should have, maybe we can't. Maybe we need to add the namespace. It looks like we do. So let's go to our view imports. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's in there. So we forgot to do that in the last video, but that's all right. We'll do it now. Contoso RTM models. And that's probably not the best practice, is it, right? Remember how we were talking about very early on that you really should be using view models as the models that you use with your views. But for the simplicity of this video, I'm just going to go ahead and do that for right now. So now that we've defined a model for our view, we can use this model as part of our HTML helper to generate these labels and our input text boxes. So let's start off with this first one, the ID. The first thing we're going to do is do @HTML dot, and now we can use the label for method. And the label for method And it doesn't look like I'm getting any IntelliSense for it, but there we go. The label for method accepts a link expression. So I'm going to go ahead and use this link expression, M, which stands for the model. Okay, that's going to be this model of type contact, goes to m.id. And that will generate this label tag. Now, immediately after our label tag, we have this input of type text. So let's go ahead and once again use the HTML.label for. Oops, we don't want to use label for, excuse me. We want to do text box for. And the same thing goes here. We can just simply pass in a lambda expression. So a type of lambda expression or func of contact with a T result. So again, I'm going to use the M to define that the model is going to be passed in. And we're passing it in and looking for the ID. So this will create the same input of a type text box. So let's go ahead and comment out. I'm just going to comment out the label and the input. We still want that break here though, right? This BR, so that it looks properly formatted on our page. So let's save that and let's go ahead and run our application. And now we once again have the same form that we had, and if we take a look at the code behind our form, we'll see once again, so we got the form, we got our label of ID, we've got our input box, and we got a break there for to go down to the next line. Now, something that you may notice here is that along with the original tag that we got generated back here with our input of type text, name ID, and a value, the HTML helper has also included some data validation. This data validation can actually be picked up by the unobtrusive AJAX. And those of you who are not sure what unobtrusive AJAX is, or what even AJAX is, it's a way of JavaScript to look at the tags on your inputs, and if you do not have a proper value, or if you are violating this required element, then the AJAX will notice that, hey, you did not put this in. And while the user is actually inputting in the value into this ID field, if it doesn't match, then the AJAX itself will actually give back this, the ID field is required. So you're getting what they call client-side validation through JavaScript. The JavaScript is actually seeing this data attribute called data val required, and if you do not enter in a value for ID, the AJAX, or this JavaScript on the client side or in the user's browser, will see that you did not enter a value in there, and it will display this error: the ID field is required. So this HTML text box 4 is doing more than just creating this tag. It's also doing some looking into what this contact class is. And if we look back at our contact class, we'll see that there is in fact a required attribute on the ID field. Let's do the same thing for our first name here. So I'm going to go to our first name, and I'm going to comment this out. And now we'll do HTML label for, do M goes to M, and we want to do first name, so first name, and then we'll do another HTML text box for M goes to M dot first name, and then of course we need that break, so we'll do BR. Okay, so let's save this, and now let's see what the, oops, I did /BR. We want to do BR /. There we go. Okay, so let's save that and let's run this, and we'll take a look and see what those data attributes are. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, and everything looks about the same, so let's go ahead and take a look at the code behind it. And let's just see what kind of data attributes we got. Oh, look at this. So we got data value is true, data val minimum length is 2, the minimum length error message, if you forget to put in a value is the field first name must be a string or array type with a minimum length of 2. And then we have a max of 50. The field first name must be a string or array type with a maximum length of 2. So there's this text box for method is actually looking at the class property and seeing those attributes on our property to come up with some of the validation messages that could come up with our JavaScript. Now we'll cover getting that AJAX validation in a little bit later, because our validation is actually already pretty much handled when we start taking a look at the model state. And if we return it back as not valid, then those error messages that are on our model state will actually get put back into our view. And that's something that we're going to be talking about here very shortly, is that we will actually get some error messages back to the view that we can display to the user whenever they do something wrong. So stick around for that video. And if you liked this one, if you liked this video, please don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe to my channel. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. I look forward to seeing you guys at the next video. Thanks for watching.